Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. And in this episode, I am doing another interview, and I'm very, very excited to do this one because I wanted to get this guy on my podcast for a long time. It's one of my dear friends that I've known for pretty much an eternity nowadays, Mr. Montie Guthrie. Montie, how are you doing?
Pretty good, Wim. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Very happy that you're here. Now, obviously, people don't know all my friends, so I want to introduce you a little bit. You're a law enforcement officer. You've had a full career in different agencies, but mainly, and I think that you already started in the service then. When I got to know you, you were an Air Marshal. But before we get into that, which is what I want to have pretty much as the main discussion topic, could you just give a little bit of your background and the career you had in law enforcement?
Sure, absolutely. After college, kind of knocked around a little bit, did a little bit of travel to the U.S. since I was a small town boy in Texas and hadn't seen hardly anything. But then shortly after that, I fell into a job as a parole officer, which your listeners may not understand the concept of parole. In the U.S., parole is when you're released from prison early and then you spend the remainder of your sentence under supervision. You still live at home and you work and everything else, but you have to check in with your officer to make sure you're complying with all whatever restrictions you had put on you. So I did that for 3 years, right around 3 years. And then I became a Border Patrol officer of the U.S. Border Patrol in the southern border here in Texas, in Laredo, Texas, actually. Did that for the better part of a decade. And then I was actually teaching at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center as teaching new recruits, rookies. I was a law instructor at that point, and I was there when 9/11 happened, and I watched all the planes crash into the buildings. And then that seemed like a very important job that needed to be done. An opportunity offered itself, and then I applied and was accepted to the Federal Air Marshal Service and did that from the very beginning of 2002 until about 2 weeks ago.
All right. So I think it's fair to say that you've had like a very, how should I put it, a wide variety of different jobs in law enforcement. So I think that gives you a very specific insight into what law enforcement is about. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show. But the main thing that I wanted to start as the first topic is the Border Patrol, because and we were talking about this before we started recording. But so for the listeners, we're not going to get all political. That's not the goal. My main goal when I invite guests is because they're specialists in a specific field, is that I like to share information that they have from their experience, from their training, and so on, that we can share with you, which you would otherwise have a very difficult time getting. So just imagine that it's just Monty and me talking a little bit about everything that's going on. So the Border Patrol, could you just explain, what's the job like? What is it like as an officer in the Border Patrol every day?
I mean, that's kind of a hard question because it really depends on where you are.
Okay.
Being a Border Patrol agent in Texas is going to be very different than being a Border Patrol agent on the Canadian border, for example. Okay. And then you have, even along the southern border, you have differences. Different stations are run different ways. Some stations, and again, also, please appreciate that my information is a little over 15 years old now. So I haven't worked as a Border Patrol agent in a while. I have no idea why my phone, I apologize, it should be
Don't worry about it.
But the job that we had, it changed in the time that I was there. When we first got there, it was crazy. It was essentially the Wild West in many ways. We were always undermanned. There was times it would be our shift to be 5 people, 6 officers, and maybe a supervisor. And it was insanely busy. It was nothing for us to catch, arrest 100 people in a shift. That was pretty standard.
Yeah, just clarifying for the audience. So you said 100, right?
100, 100, correct.
Yeah, that's a lot of people.
My personal best in a day with a partner was 90. Me and a guy named James Beard, we arrested 90 people, 90 in one shift. A shift was 8 hours regular, and then you always went over. So usually around between 9 and 10 hours. So within 10 hours, we arrested 90 people. My personal best as a solo unit, which was just me, was 72.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it was. It was insanely busy. It was just running and gunning all the time. A lot of narcotics, a lot of illegals. I was never really good at the whole narcotics game. Some guys, or we call them the dope hounds, they can just find it. They just know it. Anytime I found it, with a very few exceptions, was just blind luck. I just kind of stumbled onto it. But my personal best narcotics seizure, it was a whole kind of a whole team thing, was I think it was like 1,782 pounds, if I remember correctly. It was just shy of 2,000 pounds of marijuana, of cannabis.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff was not unusual. We would get huge groups. Sometimes you just catch small groups throughout the day. Sometimes you catch the same group 3, 4, 5 times, in a shift. Then towards the end of my career, it started changing. They wanted to make more static positions. So basically they would take you at the high volume crossing areas and put and you would just stay there, very visible to deter people from crossing.
Yeah.
Some of these areas, if they could make it across the river, which I work in Texas, so we have the Rio Grande River, which is a natural, barrier. If they make it across the river and get dressed and changed, it's maybe a 200-yard run to get into downtown. And if you get into downtown, it's very, very, very difficult to find them because, there's hundreds of thousands of people shopping down there. So it's very easy to blend in. It's very hard to find. So it's just a short little sprint. And if they could make that short little sprint, that was it. So you would post up on those places where you're high visibility to deter them to go and cross at the more difficult crossings.
Yeah.
That I'm not really sure on the effectiveness of that, because in order for that to work, then you have to have the manpower to check those more difficult crossings. So if you're pushing them to an area that's more remote, you got to have somebody out there to check those remote areas. And for a long time, we didn't have that. Now the Border Patrol is about 3 or 4 times the size it was when I left. When I left, it was probably around 6,000 agents. Now it's 20-something thousand.
Yeah, it's a pretty big difference.
Very big difference, and the job has changed dramatically too since my time as well. But it was really, it was very, very, very eye-opening work, and you became very accustomed very quickly to deal with always being outmanned. It's just you, and you catch a group of 30 people. It's just you. And you don't even have 30. You don't have 30 bullets, in your firearm and your gun with your reloads, with your magazines. So you had to get really good at controlling large groups of people very quickly. And again, most of the people who are coming across were just looking for work. They're not necessarily quote unquote bad guys, but that's what I actually was good at. I wasn't all that great at finding the dope, finding the drugs, but I was really good at finding criminal aliens. I don't know why, I could just find them. And so that was kind of the way I looked at my job.
And could you give an example of how would that go if you spot one, like you say, criminal aliens, or any examples that you could give?
It was just a vibe that I would get usually, or just something about the way they carried themselves, or it's really hard to articulate what it was, but there was just something that would just make me curious. And so then, when we take the aliens back for processing, I would just do a really thorough job on this guy. Check the prints and just just do some digging and see if this guy had. And obviously, you can't dig into other countries. I don't have those access to those databases, but if they had done something here in this country, And you do get your robbers, your rapists, your dealers, every once in a while you get a guy that was very rare. Get a guy who murder, or something. And the way I kind of looked at it is we have enough shitheads in our own country that we can't get rid of. I don't want to import other ones. So that was just kind of the way I looked at my job. Was just like sifting for gold, like the old miners, panners. They just sift all the sand through, and then the sand just goes back into the river, and then they find that one nugget or nuggets of gold. And that's what I was looking for, because you're not going to stop, in my opinion. You're not going to stop the illegal immigration. It's just too much border. There's just too many. You're not going to stop it completely. All you can do is just kind of really get the worst offenders out of the mix.
Yeah.
So
I think that I just want to come back a little bit to something you just said, is that, and I think a lot of people might not appreciate just what that means, is that, like you said, you were continuously pretty much outmanned by whatever group you would catch, 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever, how many people that you would find. And you're just standing there by your lonesome self. And you have to control those people. And like you said, you don't have enough bullets in your gun to stop them all. So if they decide to rush you, if there's a bunch of hard cases in there, and they start to incite maybe like a little riot, and those guys rush you, you know what's going to happen to you. I mean, it's not going to be a good day for you. So, and there's no backup coming in time, in the sense that there's not going to be 50 other U.S. Marshals that are going to be there to help you. So it's a pretty different sort of law enforcement job when you compare it to either a big city or even a small town, or it's just very different. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely. Again, like I said before, the majority of people who coming across are just decent folk looking for work. They the economic circumstance, or maybe depending on the time, it could be fleeing political, looking for asylum. It could be fleeing civil war. We arrested people from, oh God, I've arrested Chinese, from Sierra Leone, from Russia, from Lebanon, from Saudi Arabia, all kinds of Central and South Americans, just, Albanian. One of the worst incidents I had in the Border Patrol was with an Albanian. So it all depends. Did you hear that sound? That's the Scotch being opened. By the way, everyone should drink, because the more you drink, the better we sound. So.
Yeah, well, people don't know, this is my first podcast recording where I'm actually involving alcohol. So I have a very nice bottle of Macallan 12 sitting next to my desk. And I think you're a Talisker guy, right?
I'm on the Talisker right now, Talisker 10, yes.
So I just want to make sure that all the listeners know that the quality of what we say, it's only going to get better the further we get into the talk.
Absolutely. And it'll get better, especially if they're drinking along with us. There's no doubt about it. So, but yeah, like I said, most of the people coming across were good people, but because of the volume that you're dealing with, just the percentage game is just sooner or later you're gonna bump into it. And
yeah,
I used to tell this to new guys, to new officers, it's like you're gonna get asked the question at some point, and the question's gonna be, you're gonna tell somebody to do something, and there's going to be some variation of I'm not going to do it. Fuck you. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And you better have an answer to that question when it's asked. So when you have that volume of people, you're going to have problems. You're going to have incidents. You're going to have a lot of uses of force, and sometimes it could get really serious, especially like you said, when you're so greatly outmanned, and there's natural weapons everywhere where we were. There was rocks everywhere. I've been rocked. I never want to be rocked again for the rest of my life. It was the most terrifying thing that's ever probably happened to me. I've been shot at. I've been in several shootings in the Border Patrol. Mostly just, shootings from the Mexican side. One was what you would consider to be more of a gunfight. I'm not really sure it would be technically that, because it's not like, what most people think of in shooting, what they see on TV or whatnot. It's just a bunch of people running through brush and trees, and you can't really see, and there's just gunshots being shot, so it's hard to articulate. But those weren't nearly as scary to me as the rocking. And maybe it wasn't because of the rock itself, it's just the way the situation went down. But those weapons were everywhere. You just reach down and pick up a rock. And I'm not talking about a little pebble. I'm talking about something the size of your fist or bigger. Yeah. And even if it doesn't, if it hits, if it connects, even if it doesn't kill you, you're going to be greatly disadvantaged. And then somebody could just stroll up, grab your gun, and then you're only going to be alive if they let you be. So we're always cognizant of that. And not to mention, like you said, if a whole group of people decide to do it, even if a couple of them get shot, they're going to get you more than likely. Yeah. And then you're going to have a really, really, really bad day. So you just kind of learn to control groups of people as best you can. And some people are better at it than others,
Yeah. And that's I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, just like you said, what it's really like. And you get hit by a rock and you're not going to just shake it off and keep going and be at 100%. That's only in the movies. What would be, are there any other myths that, you encounter when you talk to people about having worked in the Border Patrol, that you see that people just consistently have these weird ideas that are totally out of whack with reality?
I don't know if it's necessarily out of whack with reality so much as I think there's imprecision in thought. There's a lot of slogans that get kicked around, and we talk about we're not going to get political. And so in that saying, in that sense, it happens on both sides of the political aisle, where they throw out these little slogans. And in this topic, it's the secure the border, and that's never ever defined. What does that mean? What do you mean by secure the border? They just say it as if it has some kind of a priori meaning. It doesn't mean anything in and of itself. Does that mean when you secure the border that no one ever crosses ever? Well, that's never going to happen. That didn't even happen in East Germany when they used to shoot people. For not even doing anything, just trying to get across the border, which we can't do when we shouldn't do in the U.S. So that didn't even work. You're never going to have 100%. So what percentage is now secure in your mind? Does it mean we arrest most of the people who cross? Well, we already do that, especially at least in my experience. Again, mine's 15 years old, but we caught. I left in 2002 from in early 90s, so 95 to 2002. We were arresting somewhere between 750,000 to a million and a half people a year. A lot of those were obviously repeats. You catch the same person multiple times, but let's just say 500,000 people a year. Are you going to build a prison that's going to house 500,000 people a year? 500,000 people. That's a lot of people. Where are you going to put them? So if you arrest them and you're going to just put them somewhere, where? And even if you did, it's a misdemeanor. It's a Class A misdemeanor in federal law. So it's up to 1 year. So you can put them up to 1 year. There's just no space. There's just no way. So we would catch them. Then you would do your paperwork, and you would do your records checks on them, whatever, and you send them back. And then they cross again, and then you catch them, and then you do your paperwork and you send them back. And then eventually you just don't see them anymore. So does that mean that they gave up and went home? Or does that mean that they eventually made it? No, eventually they made it. But you have this idea that there's this mythical land called securing the border that can be reached, and I don't think that it really can. Not in the ultimate sense, I guess. Not in the sense of it's this impenetrable barrier.
Yeah. Yeah, and my experience is very similar. I did a part of my military service. I was attached to basically the holding area next to the airport, where back in that day, the asylum seekers would come by plane, and they didn't have a valid passport, and they'd get picked up and then put in a holding facility right next to it. And I did a part of my service there. And same thing, people have a lot of ideas of like, well, you should do this and you should that. But then when you try to implement that in the real world, and like you said, look at the scale. You have to scale this stuff for tens of thousands of people. So how does that work? So and I think that's one of the things that we're often missing in today's, even the news, or I'm not even talking about politics, but just the information that gets shared. That kind of view often doesn't make it, and that's why I like to talk to this kind of stuff with people like you who've done that kind of job and who know that whoever claims whatever perfect solution to the problem, maybe it doesn't really work in the real world. It's a great theory, but maybe talk to somebody who's actually done the job and see if that still floats.
Well, I mean, in some, agents may have a different, take on that. That I'm certainly not speaking for everyone. This is just my experience and my take on it. I just try to look at things objectively as much as possible. And I can certainly be wrong. It happens quite a bit.
Sure.
But
yeah,
this is just my take on it. You're talking several thousand miles of border there with huge volumes of people, and I just don't see it. But maybe somebody else does. So
okay, well, I think I'd like to switch to the next topic. So you were an Air Marshal for a long time, and I think that's one of. And as I was preparing for the interview, actually, I've looked it up a little bit. I found one interview with an Air Marshal, so I didn't find much. So I think you're pretty much the second interview that's going to be online. Just to be clear, so you are retired now as an Air Marshal?
Correct.
Right, so just to make that clear for everybody. And there are some things that you obviously cannot talk about for security reasons, so we're not going to go into that. So if some of you listeners are wondering why I'm not asking certain questions, or if Monty says, well, I can't really talk about that, that's the reason. It's about security. This is not fun and games. There are actually lives at stake here. I always wanted to say that, so pretty much, could you kind of give everybody an idea of what's the job of an Air Marshal? What do you guys do?
Well, in the most raw sense, as I told you earlier, we are professional hijackers. We hijack airplanes, but we hijack them from the hijackers. So the hijacking has happened, and when they're doing their thing and trying to take over the plane, then our job is to take over the plane again, but for the good guys, So in a lot of ways, we train and think like how a hijacker would. After 9/11, the program had become very, very small. I think 33 is the number that's always cited. I'm not exactly positive on that, but there was only a very small handful of Air Marshals left. And they were mostly focused on international coverage. And then, of course, 9/11 was domestic. After 9/11, we ramped up pretty quickly. Basically, as I understand it, again, not there to document all this is happening, but as it was kind of relayed to us, basically the Air Marshal Service took this problem to a bunch of Delta Force guys, and Delta Force is they're kind of where they used to be known for. They're basically hijackers. They weren't hijackers. They were anti-hijackers. They would take planes back from terror groups who had hijacked them. That was one of their specialties. So basically, they took it to the Delta Force guys and said, "How would you do it if you were already on the plane? If you don't have to worry about breaching, you don't have to worry about anything. You're already there. How would you do it?" And then they kind of came up with a program, and they said, "Okay, now not with the team that you have, and not with the weapons you have. How would you do it with these weapons and with this number of people?" And then they just kind of, I guess, took it to the laboratory and just kind of came up with a good, the best plan they could, and said, "This is how we would do it," and that's how we were trained. Cool little fun fact for your listeners: if you've ever watched the movie Black Hawk Down, yeah. my phase 1 instructor was Norm Hooten, the guy who says, "This is my safety," when he's pointing to his finger. Yeah. That was my phase 1 instructor. really, really funny, nice guy. Had some fun doing. I think he was my single aisle tactics instructor for the most part. But and then my firearms instructor at my office was Jim Smith, which is the guy who is in the movie who when the first helicopter is hit, he's the guy who gets thrown out and is holding on to the I think it was the skid, maybe it's the door. He's holding on, trying to get back in, and then the helicopter hits, and then they have the huge firefight. That was my firearms instructor at my office. So I had seriously the best training I think you can get in the federal government, maybe ever. Certainly the best training you can get outside of a specialized unit like maybe FBI, HRT, or some of these tactical units. But we are all pretty much getting the same training instruction, and it's top notch. It's by far better than anything I got in the Border Patrol. In the Border Patrol, I got a great academy, and then basically it was just a whole bunch of work. It wasn't a whole lot of training after that. Whereas the Air Marshal service, we trained every month. We had at least, in my office, we had at least 16 hours of training, 2 days of training every month. And our training was pretty high speed. We got banged up a lot. We took our lumps, that's for sure. But the job itself is, mostly boring. You listen to a lot of podcasts. There was no Demeere podcast back then, so I consider that a failure on your part, man. But
obviously,
you read a lot of books, you watch a lot of TV. You do things. There's just only so much you can do to stay awake on a 15-hour flight, to Asia.
Yeah.
But you do that, and then you try to stay alert as much as possible for a thing that doesn't happen, and thankfully it doesn't happen. You don't really want it's kind of a weird thing. You don't want a hijacking to happen, but if it does happen, you want to be the guy to deal with it because you think you can do some good there. So it's one of those kind of weird dichotomies. Boredom is beautiful for the most part. And you don't really want an exciting day in the Federal Air Marshal Service, because if you have an exciting day, it's going to be pretty much the worst day of your life. And it's going to be the worst day for everybody on that plane's life. And people are more likely going to get hurt, if not killed. So you don't want it to happen. But that's what we were there for, to make sure that doesn't happen again. And, we trained hard. We took it serious. And I think some of the politicians don't take it as serious as we did. I've heard stuff, politicians like, oh, these guys had the greatest job. They just don't do anything. They're lazy or whatever. And I was always just like, come fly with me for a month, just 1 month, and let me know how you feel when you're crossing international, boundaries, once a week. For us, go to Europe and back every week. And you're only there for 20 hours. You fly to Europe, you wherever you happen to stay, wherever your flight goes, and you stay there for 20, 24, however long. It's not very long. Then you come back and you do that every week. So essentially, I just tell people, just pick a day in the middle of the week, just any time of the week, and just stay up for 24 hours. You can do whatever you want. You can read, you can play games, you can, watch TV, you just can't sleep. And then let me know how you feel after about a month. And then you're still required, of course, you still need to go and practice. You still need to be shooting because they make a point of pride that our testing is, to pass our test, you'd essentially it's I believe it's an 80. Like on a scale from 1 to 100, an 80 is passing.
Yeah, pretty high.
85, maybe 85. I had to do the math, but it's essentially that's if you score less than an 85, you fail, and if you fail, you can't fly until you pass it. And it's kind of the federal standard course that a lot of agencies shoot. There's different courses, different agencies shoot different courses. We have our own courses too that we shoot. But that's kind of what we're known for. We're shooters. We are, we're good at close quarter combat. That's kind of what our niche, our specialty. We don't investigate. We don't, do a lot of these. We don't make a whole lot of arrests because there's just not a whole lot of crime that's happening on planes that you can really deal with, and our job is really not that anyway. Yeah. Our job to deal with possible terror attack, hijacking. So we don't really get a whole lot of experience with that. What we do get a lot of experience with is in shooting and fighting and how to do those things in a very specialized environment.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. In my opinion, like you said with the Border Patrol, is that it's a very, the context within that you're working in is very, very specific. Like you said, where you were working, there was a river, so it was very different than from maybe a couple hundred miles down the line from the border. And same thing here, when you do law enforcement, it is not the same thing in a big city than doing it in the narrow hallway of an airport, of an airplane.
Right.
Where
right.
it's just
it's fighting in a phone booth. So if you're martial arts, people listening to your podcast, take your art and put it in a phone booth and now do it, or now take your art and put it in just a hallway where there's no offlining, there's no, you're not getting off the X, you're on the X, you're what we call the fatal funnel. You're in it. You're in the fatal funnel at all times. There's no cover, there's no concealment. So it's a lot of what we do tactically would be stupid for most people to do, which is why I don't really, in my, when I talk to people about this kind of stuff, I don't really delve into tactics too much. Tactics are fluid. They change from time to time. What you're going to do, is not kind of set in stone. It's going to be different depending on the context. The principles are usually the better way to go. But because if you took our tactics and try to apply them in your real life, you'd be stupid, in my opinion.
Yeah. Is that something you can talk about the principles you mentioned?
We have our principles are pretty simple. I mean, the number one principle, and I actually had it. I lived this principle so much. I actually had it tattooed on my body in the Norse runes because that's my ancestry. That and Scottish. The first principle is know the mission. Let me say that again, not a Texan accent. Know the mission. Sorry, Texas comes out sometimes. Maybe not as bad as Clint, but
yeah.
And the main thing with know the mission is that applies to everything in your business. That applies in pretty much every aspect of your life. Is what is your mission right now, and that's going to change. But to stick to self-defense, since this is kind of your battle, if you're a professional, you're a bouncer, you're a law enforcement officer, you're a EMT, whatever it happens to be, your mission is going to be different than if you're at the store with your family. So you need to understand what is your mission at that time, and you need to do the things that accomplish that mission and not the things that work against it. So if you're with your family and your mission is to get your family to safety, then maybe, going and dealing with whatever that problem is that's happening is not going to, take care of that. It's not going to actually work towards, accomplishing that mission. So that's the number one thing. You've got to know what it is you're trying to do at that moment. And you need to do the things that make that happen and not work against it. The second thing is to just act decisively. Just whatever you're going to do it. Do it hard. Do it fully. Commit to it. Don't kind of do the whole wish-wash thing and just kind of half. I mean, if it comes time to put hands on people, it's time for violence. Then you need to do that. You need to not. What is it? You don't hit softly, I guess, as it were. If it comes time for that, you act, and you act hard. Speed, surprise, and violence of action will handle most of your problems. That's the third principle. When you do act, you want to act, as quickly and as much surprise and just as aggressively and violently as you can. If it comes time for violence, be violent.
Yeah.
There's no nice way to be violent. I'm sorry. You can use violence in a context. You can use appropriate violence. And I'm not talking about, it comes time for it, that means whip out a gun or a knife and go to work. No, I mean, if it comes time, if it's where you need to use, come along holds or pressure points or what have you, then you still use those. You still use it with the appropriate use of force level, but you don't just kind of half-ass it. You whole-ass it. You get in there and you do what you need to do. And then the fourth principle is just keep it simple. Don't do 10 things we're wanting to do. This is a big problem in the martial arts, just overcomplication of things. Where it becomes this whirlwind of death that you're dealing out with the 32 moves of crazed kung fu, monkey style kung fu. I don't know, whatever it is. No, guys, come on. If it comes time for actual violence, especially in violence, but even in anything, don't overcomplicate it. Go in there, do the simplest things, get that low hanging fruit, do the simplest things that give you the biggest return on investment, give you the biggest chance of success. The more complicated you get, the more likely you are to fail. And obviously, sometimes complicated is necessary. I'm not saying that it's simple is always the answer, because sometimes it's going to take some complicated, processes, but you still want to keep it. Even in the complicated realm, you still want to keep it as simple as you possibly can within that context.
Yeah. Well, and there's another one that I want to add to it. Then my Patreon, the people on my Patreon page, my patrons, they got this one in one of my newsletters, and I think I mailed that to you. There's something what I call Montie's Law, which is named after you, because the other guy who's told that to me.
It's never the other guy's turn.
Exactly, and I love that. It's never the other guy's turn. Now, could you explain a little bit what you mean with that?
That's something I've noticed a lot in martial arts, especially. It's kind of I think in fencing they call it right of way, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that, but basically that you'll see it in martial arts. It's like you do your thing, like you're coming at me, Wim, and I'm covering up, and and I'm blocking and deflecting and doing everything, and then I see an opening, and then I do my thing, and it's just this back and forth, give and take, and I've never played that way. It's a sparring mentality. It's a dueling mentality, and I guess you can do that if you want to do, tool development, and that's a whole other rant I can go on. Tool development is important, but at some point you got to get past developing your tools, and you need to apply your tools. And so when it actually comes time for, when the balloon goes up, you go, and I just go until I can't go anymore, or you're down. I try not to ever let you get a turn, so you and I were talking about earlier, like Clint. I would never want to fight Clint in my most optimistic moment in my life. I would never want to.
So just for the listeners who don't know who Clint is, I would invite you to listen to the previous episode in which I interviewed Clint, and that's episode number 11, interview with Clint Overland. Go listen to him, and there's a link to where he's teaching a seminar with Terry Trahan and some more. And you do not want to go up against Clint. That would be
no. I'm giving up 100 pounds on Clint, and I'm giving up a knowledge. He has a very specific type of violence that he's dealt with, which is more like this, than the type of violence that I'm more familiar with, which is probably at a more dangerous level, in certain ways, because it's almost always more towards the lethal force scale of the continuum. You don't want to fight Clint. That's just tactical suicide. There's just quicker ways of killing myself if I feel like it, and less painful and less humiliating ways. So you don't want to do that, but if you have to. If I absolutely have to, it's not going to be fair. You show me a guy who's in a fair fight, and I'll show you a guy who's lost his mind.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
I that's how we do our stuff. if I do the whole give and take with Clint, if I do the whole, it's his turn, it's my turn, I'm going to get dropped like a toilet seat. It's going to be, awful. So I'm not going to do that. If I have to go against Clint, I'm going to go as hard as I can and try to never let him get a chance. And hopefully, if the gods are smiling on me, then hopefully I'll be able to take him out and down before he's able to really do much, because that's my only shot, to be honest. Yeah. So I see this a lot, and this is something that I think is really applicable in the world of women's self-defense. They teach women to fight like guys, and you're just going to lose. You're just going to lose doing that for the most part, because you just don't have the horsepower.
Exactly.
You need to do it more like in the sense of what I'm talking about, of making sure usually self-defense means you're losing. So some stuff has already happened to you, but once you get into the fight, you need to go. You need to go as hard as you can and get that position of dominance, and then just never let them get it back.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that is most difficult to understand for people who come from either martial arts, but more specifically a combat sports background, whether it's MMA, boxing, Muay Thai, doesn't matter, is that the sparring mindset and what works in sparring is very, very different from what we're talking about in those situations where you find yourself in.
It's good training, Wim. It's good training.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, it's like, okay, so you go, let's just go through the paradigm. So you go and, you learn, and maybe you're learning to punch air for a while, and then, okay, so you get your form decent. Okay, now you're going to hit this heavy bag, and you're going to notice some differences when you hit that heavy bag. So you start hitting the heavy bag, and then you start learning the lessons that the bag has to teach you. That's good.
Yeah.
But the bag is static. The bag doesn't hit back. The bag doesn't, try to impose its own game plan on you. It's just sitting there just taking what you give. So then you add sparring to the equation. Sparring is a whole other level of complexity and difficulty, because now you have an opponent who's trying to not let you do your thing, and they're trying to do their thing to you, which is great. And you're going to learn some lessons there. But if that's where you stop, you're nowhere near where you need to be for self-defense. If you just want to play and that's just all you want to do, great. But don't think that what you're doing is necessarily going to apply in a self-defense context, because even like your highest MMA players, the best guys in the world, they're still in a duel. They know who they're going to fight. They know when they're going to fight. They know everything. They have all this information. There's some problems with that, as you're well aware as a former fighter. There's some nerves. I mean, there's fear that you're going to have this guy's going to try to take your head off at a certain time and certain date and certain place, and you have to train for that. And it's going to happen, and there's no lying to yourself. I've never had to experience that really. I've fought some, in martial arts and whatever, but it's never been, that kind of thing really.
Yeah.
But whereas, a lot of cops can lie to themselves that it won't happen to them. A lot of people in the world, it'll never happen to me. They can say that, and maybe it will. Maybe it won't happen with them, But if it does, it's horrible, and it happens, and you don't know it's going to happen. You're not prepared for it, and you gotta get prepared for it in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
So
exactly, it's a completely different thing, and just to clarify what I meant for listeners, obviously having a competitive background myself, I have nothing against that kind of training. My point is always that there's value in all sorts of training, but you have to understand where that value lies when you want to apply it in a specific context. Now, that's why I never try to use, very traditional martial arts training for competitive fighting. There was a little bit of overlap, but a lot of it was very, very different and didn't apply in that context. And the same thing goes the other way. It's the sparring that you can do in an MMA gym and so on. And that's me talking as an MMA teacher. It's excellent for that environment, and you learn things that are applicable overall when it comes to using violence. However, the differences between all those different environments, from the training, doing training in the gym, doing a competition in the cage, and then defending yourself in the street, and then what you do trying to hijack back a plane when a bunch of terrorists or whatever are taking over. Those are vastly different environments. So your techniques, your mindset, your tactics, everything changes according to the environment, the context that you find yourself in, and of course the mission that you have, like you said earlier.
Correct.
So,
And, it also applies, with you have to make decisions, in the world. Like if you're in a ring, your decision-making process is limited. You've got an opponent. You're trying to do your thing. You're trying to stifle his thing. And whatever he wants to do, if he's a grappler and he's trying to take you down and you're more of a stand-up guy, you're trying to, to stiff his takedowns, and you're trying to keep the fight on the feet. So you have a limited range of decision-making that needs to happen. If you're out in the world and you're just out with your buddies and you're having a good time, or your girl, or your whatever, and then some guy just starts like, dude, what the fuck are you looking at?
Yeah.
And now you're trying to figure out what just happened. What am I looking at? Why is this guy upset? And then, when you're trying to process these things and try to figure out what they call the OODA loop, which is, observe, orient, decide, act. You're in the middle of your OODA loop and he's already closed his. And then the next thing you know, you're just on the floor, and you just got hit, and you have no idea what just happened. And these are decisions you're having to make. And now, what can you do? Or if it actually hasn't gone violent yet, and you're trying to figure out, wait a minute, what can you get violent? Can you hit first? Can you all of these things that you're having to decide? You're having to make these decisions. And you're going to have to justify them to some rather forceful guys with badges, perhaps later on.
Yeah.
And you're having to do these at the time that your rational brain is at its worst. Thinking things through, like you and I right now, we're having a conversation and we're talking, and we're feeding off each other, but we're kind of thinking out loud. That's a very slow process. In a fight, a second is a long time.
Exactly.
When I said the OODA loop, which is again OODA, observe, orient, decide, act. It's kind of a loop that most people go through when things are happening. We would exploit an OODA loop in my work, and the basic rule of thumb is once you do something, once we went active, whoever went active first, once we started doing our thing, you had 3 to 5 seconds of kind of a grace period where you could kind of do what you want to do before they could, really mount a real defense. Because you have to observe what's happening. I'm observing it. What's going on? Where did that come from? What happened? Then you have to orient to it. Oh, that thing happened. Where did it happen? Oh, it happened over there. That's my threat. Then you have to decide, what am I going to do? And then you have to act. Then you have to do it. The guy who closes the OODA loop first, more times than not, wins. Yeah. And I saw this a lot, working in bars. I worked in bars, and not like Clint, not those type of bars, but I worked in bars through college and after college. And my first job is I moonlighted also working the door. And the guy who stopped talking first usually won in the confrontations. And but you have to have your brain in that point where you can make those decisions and then do them. And if you're trying to figure out what the fuck's going on, and the other guy has already figured out what the fuck's going on, you're in a bad spot.
Yeah. And for the listeners, I will put a link in the show notes regarding the OODA loop or Boyd cycle, as it's also called. So if you're not familiar with that, then you can look that up there. No, and I totally agree with you. It's one of those things that is very hard to understand if you come mainly from a sports and competition background. It's not about the techniques. It's not, nobody's questioning that your double leg takedown is gonna fail. It's not gonna work in the street. That's not the issue. It's just that, is it a good idea to shoot one? That's the first question. What's the goal? What's the context, and so on. And the same thing applies when I talk to a lot of people who come from the gun world, and they're all into firearms, and they're like, I shoot this, and I draw. This is my drawing method, and this is blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, so how do you scale that into self-defense? Well, but what is it better to be carry
Judge by
judge by
6, then
12.
judge by 12, then carry by 6. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, okay, so the guy, like Chris Rock in his song says, if he smudges your Pumas, or it's got to be your Yeezys nowadays, I think, don't shoot the guy because he steps on your foot. So you need to have more than just good techniques. It's not enough.
Well, even for the gun guys, Wim, I mean, I've told this to people. Sometimes you may have to fight your way to your gun.
Exactly.
It may happen close where they're on you. And I saw this, for your listeners, we do scenario training. So for our scenario training, we do this usually, I'm going to say every other month. So usually somewhere between 5 and 6 times a year, we armor up. And so we put on these big giant masks and a throat protector and a groin protector. And you get a gun, which is our actual gun. They just changed the barrels out, and it shoots what's called semi-munitions. So semi-munitions is a bullet. It's shot. It's not obviously shot at the speed of a real bullet, but it's shot faster than you can see, and it has paint on it. So when it hits you, it marks you, so you can see where you're shot. And also on purpose, it almost always bruises. Sometimes breaks the skin. It's meant to hurt. It's designed to hurt. That's why you wear the throat protector, the helmet, and the groin protector. And the helmet, especially as Wim, one of my best friends, he got shot with some old equipment, and somehow you could never replicate this ever. But the bullet creased through the visor. The visor at the time didn't have I don't know what you want to call it. There was just the visor met with the helmet. There was no strip around it to seal it. And it somehow slid through the visor, and it hit him in the eye, and he's blind in that eye now. And so this is serious stuff, and you can really get hurt doing it if you're not careful. But if you do this stuff for any length of time, you see how absolutely important it is, and how difficult it is to when something bad happens and you're having to try to do what you do. I had back to your gun thing. I had a situation where in one of my scenarios where I was just swarmed. It was like 5 guys just trying to swarm me and take my weapon from me, and then use the weapon, to do their thing. And so I had to actually fight through, that many people to get to my gun. And my colleague didn't. He was not, that wasn't where his strengths lie. He was a much better shot than I am, but he just wasn't really good at that stuff, and he got kind of taken out. So your gun is not always going to solve your problems in the sense that it may be at a lesser use of force than lethal. But even if it is lethal, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to get to it when you need to. If you can't fight your way to it if you have to. So there's that as well.
Yeah, those are some of the things that there are. What I see is often, when people talk about using firearms or any weapon for self-defense, they kind of gloss over that kind of stuff, and they focus on the use of the weapon itself, as opposed to, which is just as important, and perhaps even more so, is just accessing your weapon correctly, accessing your weapon when you're under stress, when you're under attack, when you are startled, and so on. So there's a whole lot more that goes into it. Other than just hitting the bullseye on a range when you're practicing, it's not the same thing.
Exactly. You have the same kind of dueling mentality in firearms, or maybe even worse than the martial arts world in some ways, because it's the same thing. You go to the range, even at the higher levels. If you're just at the range, just developing tools, they use a pack timer. Pack timer goes off, and you shoot the triple nickel. Hey, great for you, man. That's an amazingly hard course. I completed it once, under time. I will amazing. That is not self-defense. That's just shooting. It's tool development. It's amazing tool development, but it's not, it's not really addressing the threat. Do I have, the legal right to shoot? Can I justify what I did when it's all over?
Just for the people who aren't into the firearms thing, could you explain the triple nickel a little bit?
Oh God, I'm not exactly sure if I can even remember. It's 5 targets, 5 yards, 5 seconds from cover. Cover means that your gun is concealed. So you're in concealment. You got 5 targets. You got to put 5 rounds into the 5 targets, and it's at 5 yards. And in the middle of that 5 seconds, you have to do a magazine reload. So you have to shoot, reload, shoot after you draw within 5 seconds. It's incredibly hard. You have to do it 3 times within a 24-hour period, and you have to be observed by someone who's already done it. So they have a coin. There's a coin that's given when you do the triple nickel. So if a coin holder watches you, sees you do 3 times, completed 3 times within a 24-hour period, then you get a coin. Then you get to have it. It's very, very, very rare. Like I said, I did it 1 time. Out of the other times I missed. If you miss the time, if you miss the reload, if you miss the target, it's a no-go. So it's incredibly hard. I mean, it's a elite level skill.
We're talking about like Matrix style shooting, pretty much.
It's really, really, really difficult. But it's again about as applicable to self-defense as hitting the heavy bag is to the same thing. It's just not. The guy who hits the heavy bag the best is not necessarily the guy who's the best MMA fighter, and the best MMA fighter is not necessarily the guy who's best at teaching you how to defend yourself in a world that has multiple threats, multiple ranges, weapons, no weapons, then justify it legally. I say all the time, when people teach these martial arts and they don't teach people how to talk to cops, they don't teach people the law. That's like teaching somebody how to drive, but not teaching them what a stop sign means, When you teach somebody to drive, you got to teach them the law that goes along with it. What side of the road do you drive on? What's the speed limit? What do these different signs mean? You have to teach them these laws, not just here's how you hit the gas, and here's how you work the stick shift, and here's how you turn the wheel. Those are just techniques of how to drive the car. There's more than just a technique.
No, good point. And I want to ask you something else about the work as an air marshal. How would you say that the job's evolved since you started as opposed to today? Because a lot of people seem to think like, well, there hasn't really been a major hijacking like 9/11 since then. So the air marshal service may not be as needed anymore. So
that's not a completely invalid question. I think we should always do cost benefit analysis. It applies to the wall. Is the wall that they want to build in the southern border? Is the juice worth the squeeze, as it were? It's the same thing with the FAM service. Is the money that we are spending better spent somewhere else? We have now various different layers. You have obviously they've reinforced the door to the flight decks. We have armed pilots now. We have what's called the FFDO, the Federal Flight Deck Officer Program, which I'm a huge proponent of. That's a great another layer. So even if they fought through us, they would have to get to through the door, which is hard to get through. And then if you even get to the door, then there might be a guy behind the door with a gun. And so hello. I approve of all these layers. The question then becomes, if you remove one layer, does it impede the others? I don't know. I've never really crunched the data on this. I can only give you kind of my gut assessment, and I kind of hesitate to do that a lot of times. But my gut assessment is this is like a drop in the federal budget. What we cost is not even the fraction of a percent, and civilian aviation is as much what people think as what is actually true. Because it's a business. If people think it's unsafe, they won't patronize it. If they think it's unsafe, they won't fly. So some of that is hard to measure. Is what do people think? And I think the FAM service, the FAMS is Federal Air Marshal, by the way. So that's the shorthand. So the FAM service, I think it provides a good benefit there. I think it provides a good benefit to the crews, the flight crews. We interact with them a lot. We teach them a lot of self-defense. We teach them training. We help them out as well. the flight attendants, and we also are responsible for the training of the armed pilots. I think there's some serious value there, because essentially the armed pilots are like free. They're going to fly anyway. They just happen to have a gun while they're at it, and they get a little benefit from having getting to carry a gun, and there's some, I guess, prestige or whatever there.
Yeah.
And they get a badge, and it's kind of cool. And then so it's and they provide for that little minimal, personal value, personal cool thing. They provide, I think, a valuable tool, a valuable resource for the government and for our society as well. Other people might disagree; they don't like the thought of armed pilots. I don't understand that, but okay. This guy could crash the plane into the ground anytime he wanted to.
Yeah.
Your life is literally in his hands, at any point. And, mine was as well. I was on the same bus as everybody else. If he decided today's the day I'm going down, there's nothing much we could do about it. So if you can't trust him for that, why are you worried about him having a pistol? I don't understand that logic, but I think there's still value there. I think that these groups operate in long time periods. You saw like the Bojinka plot, which was in the not even Bojinka. You want to go back to the Trade Center bombing, which was 94, 95. I'm kind of talking out of my
head. It's a long time ago. Yeah.
So you still had, you had 6-7 years before they even put in 9/11. And that was to exploit a hole, an opening that they found, kind of close that one, which is kind of the way it normally goes. You close the barn door after the horse has gotten out. But that hole is closed to a certain degree. Do you want to reopen it? That's always the question I have. And again, like anything else, it comes down to a cost-benefit analysis. What is it costing you to keep that door closed? And what is it going to benefit you if you open it? Worst case scenario. So I still think there's some value there. Whether it needs to be changed, that's another legitimate question. I think there needs to be some change in the program personally, but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
I think we need to have better. I think there's more. There's better security that can be had on the planes already that they don't do. I think the barriers are something that needs to happen. I have a friend who is really big into this, and I approve completely that physical barriers that keep people, anybody really, from accessing the flight deck, especially during times of what we consider to be a soft target, like if the door is ever open. The pilot has to do his business at some point, or her business. They have to get, food, drink, use their facilities, what have you. So if that door opens, there needs to be something there to keep people from being able to just bum rush that area. That's definitely something that I think that needs to happen. But as far as getting rid of the FAM service, is that going to increase or decrease security? I think
I agree with you, and just like you said, it's a complex answer to the question. There's more than one factor that you need to take into account. And I like what you mentioned is that these groups that do those terrorist attacks, they think long term. They don't necessarily need to strike out like on a weekly schedule. It's very different. And I remember a couple of years ago, I can't remember exactly when it was, but that there was this mention in the press of an incident where I'm not sure if it's the Air Marshals or it was airport security that got involved. I don't remember, but there was this group of 2-3 guys who were obviously Arabs, and they were doing very specific acts, and they acted in a very specific way. They were praying very loud at the check-in. They were very loudly commenting on American policy in Iraq or in Afghanistan, I don't remember. Then they were trying to do some stuff like demand a different seat in the airplane. and or demand, I think it was a larger seat belt, something along those lines, when the person wasn't obese. So just it was clearly that they were testing out, seeing how far they could push things, knowing full well that they would be burned, that these guys, they were on a watch list now and they're never getting off it. So this kind of stuff happens, and I think it's about 3-4 years ago.
We had it happen on a flight with our team. I didn't really, because I was in a different part of the plane, but I didn't really get involved myself. I was the team lead that day of the team, and we had a group of 20-something Malaysian guys, and their whole, it was a light flight. We were going to Europe. There wasn't a whole lot of people on it, so they were just terrorizing people within a certain cabin and trying to get them just an illicit reaction, what we call a probe. You're just seeing how far you can push in the system before the system pushes back. Just seeing how far you can take it, and which is different than the press calls it a dry run all the time. A dry run should be completely under the radar. You should never know that a dry run is happening. A dry run is like you want to do everything that day exactly how you would do it on the day of the actual terror attack, except don't do the terror attack part. But you do everything else, so it should be completely under the radar. So hopefully, from the terrorist perspective, a dry run is undetected. A probe is designed to see what the system will allow. Exactly. It's going to be inflammatory. It's going to be overt, and it's going to be again, the people that you are in the probe are going to be burned. They're not going to be people who are going to probably do terror attacks later, because they're going to that probe is going to cost them. So we had one, and it was the guys that were dealing with it. One of the guys was he's the kind of guy who would spit in the devil's eye. I mean, short, absolutely buff, Hispanic guy, just sleeved out biker, just tough as nails, man. And he's like, this is, I thought that I was going to have to earn my money today. I thought that this was really it. And the other guy had gone through some personal stuff and kind of let himself go a little bit. It just happens, and he had not taken his physical fitness and everything into as seriously as he needed to. And after this thing, he was in the gym like constantly, because it was like a wake up call. These things happen. Yeah. They still happen. They happen in never reported, or very rarely. They're not going to make the media because nothing happened. Because all you could say is that the plane went from point A to point B and nothing happened, because nothing did happen, except that these guys were looking at people and doing the throat slitting, thing. They would stand up over people. They would just walk next to your seat and just stand over you and just look at you. I mean, completely invading your space, just leaning in on you, and just people just left. There were so many open seats, they would just get up and move to a different seat. They were doing all kinds of stuff like this just to see what people would do. And even the flight attendants, only one flight attendant stuck around. All the rest of the flight attendants left. So, this kind of stuff, and this is years ago, no doubt. This is, I don't even want to have 8 years ago, so. But it's, I still think that there's stuff there, and as soon as, it is such what we talked about before, return on investment. If you can bring a plane down, even if you can't bring the plane down, if you can actually, put your plan in motion and actually try to hijack, even if the hijacking itself fails, it's still a strategic victory, because it's still going to be, people are going to go, nope, I'm canceling my plans. And it's going to hurt, it's going to hurt. There's the tactical victory. Do you accomplish your actual goal right then? But then there's the strategic victory. Did you create terror? And if the terror is created, then even if all the good guys are okay and all the bad guys are dead or captured, who really won? So no, I think there's still significant value there.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And it's been almost 2 years since we had the Brussels terrorist attacks where they blew up the airport and a subway station. And I can see nowadays many of my compatriots they think like, well, everything's fine, and the awareness level goes down, and and when I talk to them, they don't seem to understand that, well, these kind of groups that do these kind of things, they think really long term. They've got time. They've got time. They can try many times. They don't have to do it all right away. And like you said, the guys doing these probes, they're burned. They will never be able to. I mean, the authorities are going to watch them, obviously, and they're on all those lists. So, but they will eventually be able to relay their information that they got from probing the defenses and seeing what happens when, like you said, they're provoking passengers in the airplane and seeing how much it takes to get you guys from the Air Marshal service into action. These kind of things happen, and it's not because it doesn't make the 9 o'clock news that it doesn't happen, and it's not because you don't hear anything from those guys for years on end that they went away. Or that information is lost. That's just not how it works.
No,
unfortunately,
it's a new world. It's a different paradigm of attacking. Basically,
yeah,
guerrilla warfare versus stacking up armies. Guerrilla warfare is a whole different way of doing battle, of waging war than straight up army to army. This is why my country exists, pretty much. If we would have went army to army against Britain, we would have been slaughtered. But we did more of a guerrilla style, and theirs is this terrorism is a different way of waging war than guerrilla. I can't approve of terrorism as a strategy because it targets non-fighters. It targets grandma and grandpa and little kids and, people who have nothing to do with this. This is not, something that in my opinion is moral. It's completely immoral, but it's not going to go away. And it is how
exactly
how it's just kind of the new paradigm we have to get used to. It is tactic and it's a successful one. So it's complicit and not in a way that I would say needs to be addressed. But our media puts it out there every time an attack happens. It's huge ratings, and so they're going to put it out there, which is just a self-perpetuating cycle. You don't have terrorism without media broadcast. If nobody knows that it happened, then there's no terror except for people who were there, and there's a small group of people, So if you don't have these kind of things, but this is just kind of the world we live in, and we rightly appreciate a freedom of press that over any kind of censorship that would keep them from talking about this. So I think that is the correct metric there, but it's still something that is going to not go away because we will continue to every time. I'll tell you today, if there was a hijacking that happened right now and all the bad guys died and all the good guys were okay and the plane landed, there was no problem, the media would be all over it and it would be a huge impact. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's just the reality. So we have to appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay, and just another question. Again, same mindset as before that I always have when I ask these kind of questions. It's just the kind of information that you might seem obvious because of your training and experience. But what would be some of the myths that people have about airplanes and so on that are still active today? That you're like, no, that's not how it works. Like the whole James Bond thing. You see a bullet.
Yeah, we've talked to you and I have
the
talked
window
about
cracks.
James Bond. That's the myth of rapid of explosive decompression. Started, I think it was Dr. No, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
I could be wrong. Basically, it was a James Bond. He
shot.
The shot missed. The bullet hit the plane. It exploded out of the plane, and then the plane just, what they call the explosive decompression, which is where all the air is sucked out. The gas. I mean, the oxygen mass drop. all of that, where people are sucked out of the plane. That's not going to happen. If a bullet misses, the biggest threat of that is that it hits the wrong person. It hits grandma behind what the target was, which is obviously a horrible, horrible thing. But in the scale of, is it more horrible for grandma to die or for the plane to have a hole blown in it and 23 people get sucked out? That's not going to happen. The only problem is if anything hit a hydraulics where the plane couldn't steer. That would be catastrophic. But no, you could put. I mean, I don't even know how many holes you could put in a plane, and a lot. You could put a lot of holes in a plane, and it's going to be windy, and it's going to make a lot. It's going to be very, very noisy more so than windy. But your plane is not airtight that you're on. There's something called an outflow valve. I think it's called. I think it's in the back. Size of a shoebox. It's just a hole in the plane, and as it opens or closes depending on how much volume is lost. So if you put enough holes in the plane to create more space than the size of a shoebox, then the outflow valve wouldn't be able to compensate, and then it would start to get more difficult. But your plane's not airtight. You can hear the air if you're next to the window. You can hear it in there. If I put a hole in it, even if you punched out an entire window, again, it's going to be really windy. It's going to be really noisy. But you're not gonna have people are not gonna get sucked out the window. They're not gonna. Exactly. You're not gonna there's not gonna be like there's a small hole there, and then it's gonna get sucked out, and then there's gonna be a huge hole in it. No, it's not gonna happen. That's the biggest myth right there. What happens if you miss? You're gonna blow the hole. No, it's not gonna happen. There's that one. There's the normal myths of any kind of shooting where you can shoot somebody one time and it's going to throw them back 312 feet and they're going to die immediately. There's the normal gun myths that people think of, that you can shoot somebody in the hand, or why don't you shoot them in the hand, or why don't you shoot them in the leg, and it'll solve the problem. That happened with the Miami incident that we had, the only shooting we had in our agency, because you have to understand what we're doing is theory. It's only ever been done once that I'm aware of, where an Air Marshal, it was an Egyptian Air Marshal, actually got involved in an actual hijacking, and a shootout happened, and they both died. The terrorist and the Air Marshal died. So most of what we're doing is theoretical,
Yeah.
The only time it's actually happened on our agency where there was a lethal force incident went live and the FAMs responded was in Miami. It was on the ground, where a guy, he was, unfortunately I think he was bipolar and he was off his meds, and he came running off the plane, and the flight attendant stopped him, or tried to stop him. And he said he had to get off because he had a bomb, and he had his backpack strapped to his chest rather than on his back. He had it strapped to his chest, and he goes running down the jet bridge, and the FAMs, tried to stop him. And I know both of the FAMs who were involved in this. One of them I worked with the Border Patrol. One of them was in my office later on. He transferred. And they confront the guy in English and Spanish. He was I think he was South American, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but they're telling him, stop, don't, and he's like, if you don't kill me, I'm going to blow us up. And then he reaches towards his backpack, and they shot him. Tragic incident, because obviously there was nothing there. He was just bipolar, and he was having an episode.
Yeah. Like,
but the media later on was, why didn't they shoot him in the hand? Why didn't they do, anything other than shoot him? And like, what is the other, what do you want? If I shoot his hand, he has another hand. If I shoot him in the leg, he could still die. If I cut the artery there, I mean, if I pull the trigger, it is lethal force, and I have to justify it as if it's lethal force, because people don't understand lethal force. They don't understand the jurisprudence behind it. You see this all the time with shootings, with police shootings. They don't understand that there's a standard there. You can disagree with the standard. That's a legitimate conversation we can have. But you still need to understand what that standard is. You can't just look at it and say, well, I don't like that. I have bad feelings about that. Therefore, it's bad. No, there's a standard there. The only thing you can do is say, did those I'm not articulating this well. Does how that situation happened? Did what happened in that situation meet that standard or not? That's the only question that can be answered and can be asked and answered.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the huge problems that I see nowadays, that a lot of people don't have any idea how law enforcement works, whether it's from what you do in the Air Marshal service or just a street cop walking his beat. Is that there is a standard that they are held to, and they have to account for their actions afterwards.
It's a legal standard. It is a legal standard.
Exactly.
It's not a standard that I have to justify to my supervisor, to my boss. It is a standard that I have to justify to prosecutors. I have to justify to courts, and it is and it's pretty much universal. Wim, it applies more or less in your country, in my country, in pretty much every country. The standard is basically this for your listeners, so that you can apply this to any lethal force situation or incident that you see on TV. Does the officer have a reasonable belief that the subject possesses means, opportunity, and intent to commit violence likely to cause death or serious bodily injury? That's the standard. So basically, do they have do you believe that person has the ability to, and wants to, will try to kill you?
Yeah.
If you can meet those standards, and that standard has to be met, all three: means, opportunity, and intent. And then the other important word is likely. So is it likely to kill you or do serious bodily injury to you? That standard is pretty much universal. Where people get twisted is because it's the same standard in pretty much in Belgium or the U.S. It's just the U.S., because of different societal reasons, whatever, we have more prevalent weapons. That standard gets used a lot more, but it's the same standard. And whether an officer chooses to do it or not, if you pull a gun on me, Wim, and I choose not to shoot you, that's my choice. I had every legal right to do so. It doesn't mean that I have to, but it's my choice of whether I do it or not. It's not the choice of the guy sitting behind the keyboard. It's not the choice of the YouTube dude. It's the choice of the officer at that moment. If their legal standard is met and they choose not to, they don't want to go that route, they want to try a different tactic, that's on them. But to expect that, well, because I saw this one cop one time who talked down a dude who was threatening to kill him with a knife. Okay, good for him, man. It worked out in his favor. That doesn't mean it's going to work out in the favor of the next guy, because what you're literally asking him to do is to gamble his life. And what I've told people is one thing. What I've told people is like this: I want you to take every material possession you have and turn it into cash. So your house, put all your 401k, whatever, everything you have, where every cent you have is in cash. I want you to fly to Vegas. I want you to go to whatever casino you want to, and I want you to put it all on black on the roulette table. Every penny you have. If you win, you've doubled your money. If you lost, you're homeless. You're destitute. You don't have a cent to your name. Now, how do you think you're going to feel while that roulette is spinning, while that ball is spinning? How scared, how terrified do you think you're going to be that knowing your entire life is on this one spin? And but shit, if it goes bad, you're still alive, right? See, the cop doesn't have that. The law enforcement officer or the security officer or whatever, they don't have that assurance. If it goes bad for them, they could die.
Yeah.
And there's no winning. They don't get to double their money at the end of it. If
Exactly.
theirs goes good, then all they get to do is go home. They get to have the exact same life they had before, except now they have a whole bunch of jackasses on YouTube and the media telling them what kind of racist motherfuckers they are, And it is so unbelievably ignorant and stupid. And it really is bothersome because I try personally not to get involved in topics I don't know that much about. If I'm ignorant of something, I try not to argue about it because all I'm arguing is my feelings, my feels. And when people jump into these kind of topics and they do not have 1 second of education, they don't have 1 second of experience in this, they just have their feelings. And then all of a sudden they think that people need to respect that as an argument. Your outrage is not an argument. There's a standard there. If you want to talk to me about how those actions didn't meet that standard, great. Absolutely legitimate. Completely legitimate. We can have that conversation. If you want to tell me that that standard is not a good one, again, completely legitimate. But if you want to tell me that your feels are hurt and that you don't think that that was bad, I'm going to ignore you because you don't belong in an adult conversation about this kind of thing. There's my rant.
I totally agree with you on that, Monty, and I get the same thing. I've been writing about self-defense for a long time now, and I still get reactions that are pretty much the same thing. Well, this is horrible, and then my response is, well, I agree, this is horrible. That's not the issue. Let's put that aside because we both agree on that. The issue is how do we handle that?
Right.
And we are more and more in a situation where there are so many people commenting on social media and so on, and journalists or perhaps it's even worse with them, that they comment on anything to do with violence without ever having experienced it, while having a bunch of assumptions that may or may not be true, but they still feel the need to comment and spout their opinion.
Well, because it's the outrage machine.
Exactly.
Both sides do this. They get their it's a team sport, So you get your team outraged against the other team, and then you get support and makes your team stronger. You need the other, you make them the other.
Exactly.
And it's, oh God, it's so bothersome to me. It's so there's no principle, there's no intellectual honesty about this. And again, we can have a lot of discussions about a lot of things. And if you want to tell me, like you said, if you want to tell me that, like the pregnant lady who got shot, that is terrible. That is absolutely awful. But if you don't address the fact that she had a knife and that she was closing in on the officers and that she was saying that she was going to fucking kill them, literally, I'm going to fucking kill you. If you don't address that, if you don't say that that was part of the actual incident, you're not intellectually honest. And if you are now the person, well, why didn't they jump in there and take the knife away from her? Now you have really demonstrated to me your complete ignorance of this topic, because I can show you this in 5 minutes, not 5. I can show you this in 10 seconds. In any we go to a room, you put you a white T-shirt on. You put on a white T-shirt, I'll have a magic marker or something that'll mark you up, and that's going to be my knife, and you try to take it away from me. Good luck. Let me know how that works out for you, because you're going to be covered in magic marker when it's done. You are going to be fucked up, and that's just the magic marker. That's not even if I start throwing other elbows or knees or anything else into it. So people who have unrealistic expectations, thankfully, all they have is their outrage and their media presence. Luckily, at this point, they don't have anything backing them up, in the jurisprudence realm. Jurisprudence is still, the legal standard that we're held to, not the court of public opinion. And I'm worried that is not going to be the case forever. I'm worried at some point, people's outrage is going to become what officers, what civilians are required to do,
Yeah, and I'm just going to go on a mini rant here, and just very quickly. There was a few years ago, there was this article on the National Broadcasting Corporation website from Belgium, the VRT. So that's like what's it called on that you guys have, like the National Broadcasting channel that you have. It's like government news, so it's official, right? So they have this website with the news, and there's an opinion piece on there by a woman who's an anti-rape activist, and which I'm all for. I've worked with people. Sorry?
I said absolutely, 100% behind that.
Yeah. PBS, I think it's with you guys, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yes.
Yeah, so it's similar. And so this is like the official news source for our government. And they have an opinion piece by a woman who's an activist, and she says, well, it's problematic that so many rape cases get just tossed out of court because there's not enough proof. It's very hard to prove as a crime. So wouldn't it be better if we just change it to the assumption of guilt, and that the accused party needs to basically clear his own name, and not 1 ounce of pushback from any of the pundits and commentators and journalists who are always very, very active on just basically riding on anybody who posts anything a little bit controversial. Nothing, not a peep. And I was like, are you guys insane? Do you know what a legal precedent means? This is just overturning the entire justice system that we have.
Well, it's the same thing as what I talked about earlier when I was saying about terrorism, and you don't have terrorism without a media. If you don't have a freedom of press, you have no terrorism. It doesn't exist. Terrorism can only exist when there's a press that's able to talk about it. So then, based on that logic, we should circumscribe the freedom of the press and censor them and not allow them to talk about any terrorist action. Correct? And if you took that to them, they would be outraged. You would have op-eds everywhere. You would have like, exactly. How dare you talk about circumscribing the freedom of the press? And I agree, how dare you? But then if you're going to have that standard, then you need to apply it to the legal standard. You need to hold those principles across. If you think that it's okay that the freedom of the press is an important principle, then how about the presumption of innocence? How about that you should have that there should be some kind of burden of proof? And this is where I go absolutely apeshit with both sides, with their complete inability to have any kind of intellectual honesty and framework. They have no principles. They just follow their team. Just whatever their team tells them to do, they just do it. And this is why I have no friends on either side of the political aisle. But,
yeah, and I'm just going to quickly mention, because people, we talked about this before we started recording, that my Facebook page has a firm no politics rule. My podcast is the same thing. For the very simple reason that nothing good comes of it. It's very hard to talk politics.
My other quote,
just with people that you like.
Good will come of this.
That's your quote again. Nothing good can come of this. So it's very hard to argue politics and discuss politics with people you like, let alone complete strangers. And I've seen in the last, especially since the U.S. elections of 2016, it's gotten even worse.
Yes, it's awful. It's awful. It's team sports. It's just like, what team do you root for, and all you can do is root for that team, and whatever your team does is good, whatever the other team does is bad.
Yeah.
And I don't play that game, like I said, but kind of bringing it back to this topic, like, you want to tell me something's bad? Hey man, I'll listen. I think every use of force, civilian or law enforcement or military, whatever, needs to be evaluated. Fine, evaluated. I'm down. I'm down for that. I'm not gonna blindly back the cops. That is kind of my gut instinct, because I've been doing this job for almost 2.5, almost 3 decades. So my gut instinct is to kind of back the guys because I've been in their shoes, but I ruthlessly guard against that. And so on social media, a lot of times I will have to just go through the video, go through the statements, go through and see where does it fall down or not. And if the cop is wrong, I'm going to say that he is wrong. If the person is wrong, I'm going to say they're wrong. I'm going to say why they're wrong. And it's going to be based on on the jurisprudence. It's going to be based on here's the standard and they didn't meet it. And here's why they didn't meet it. It's not going to be because of what position they pee in. It's not going to be because of what skin pigmentation they have. It's not going to be because of what God they worship or who they want to have sex with. None of that makes a bit of difference. The only thing that makes a difference is, does what they did meet the standard for the level of force that was offered?
Yeah,
and
I'm in total agreement.
But people don't do that with them. They just don't.
No,
and it's sad.
Well, thank God there's us.
So I drink. Therefore, I drink.
my bottle of Macallan has substantially lowered a little bit.
Oh my goodness, mine as well.
Right now, yeah, we passed the 90-minute mark already, so I think we're going to have to wrap it up a little bit. First of all, a huge thank you, Monty, for taking the time for the podcast.
Anytime.
I know people, you don't have a website right now or anything, but I know you have something planned for the future about training and conditioning. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Like I said, I've been kind of, under the radar, silent but deep, kind of dude for the most part. Anything that I've ever done has been behind a screen name, so it couldn't come tracked back to me, and I couldn't get in trouble at work. But now I'm kind of trying to become more out there as a law enforcement or ex-law enforcement professional, whatever. What I would really like to do, two things. I'm a huge fan of teaching. I've learned a thing or two, and I'd like to teach that stuff to other people so they don't have to learn it the way I did, which was the hard way, shedding blood and tears. So I'd like to teach that on a couple different levels. The level that would be applicable to your audience maybe is at a certain point, I would kind of like to teach law enforcement and medical, any first responder type of job, how to stay in shape. We have a very unique kind of work environment, when you are working shifts and you're not sleeping and you have to eat whatever is open at 3 a.m. and you're working shifts, and like most of us, you probably have a challenging home life because we have about an 80-90% divorce rate. If you try to do the normal workout that the magazines and the websites will tell you, it's a sprint into a brick wall. You're just not going to make it for very, very long. You still have to do it though. You have operational needs. It's not about looking good naked, although that's a nice benefit, and I'll never argue that. But it's about, can you do the job that's in front of you? And in any first responder job, it's about controlling people ultimately. Whether it's moving, if you're a firefighter, if you're moving a comatose, an unconscious, slab of meat that's 150, 200, 300 pounds, whatever, depending on our society, do you have to move that somewhere? Do you have to get them out of the danger that they're in? If you're an EMT, do you have somebody having an episode and you have to restrain them? Obviously, in law enforcement, not only restraining them, you may have actually a combative person, who's actually trying to hurt you, kill you. So you have an operational need there, and you need to have some horsepower to back that up. There's a lot of different levels of that. And I'm kind of more towards the foundational level of strength and I don't know how to say it. Basically making all of you earn its keep. I don't want a whole lot of excess. I want everything you have needs to be functional. So if all you have is 150 pounds of mostly muscle, then we'll work with that. If you are 200 and 300 pounds and not, 200, 300 pounds of chewed bubble gum, hey man, it happens. You had a bad run. Let's get you back to a good point, a good position. And then once you kind of get that foundation built, we can decide what kind of house you want to put on it. Do you want to start doing, something? Do you want to be in a specialized program? Do you want to go be a Navy SEAL? Do you want to go be a SWAT guy? Do you want to go be in some kind of, great. Do you want to just look good naked? Hey, that's also valid. We can do that too. Whatever. But the foundation's pretty much going to be the same for everybody. and I'm all about that. And we have a problem with that, I think, in our society, and especially within the first responder community, just because of the difficulty. And it's not hard. I have done a lot of research on this. I've done a lot of self-experimentation on this. I've helped a lot of guys, and girls, mostly guys, but some girls with this in my professional career, because it's difficult. It's no bullshit. It's fucking hard to maintain good operational functionality within the context of what we do, professionally. I have a little bit of knowledge on that, and I'd like to help people. I have no idea how to do that, on a large scale. I know the material. I don't know how to get the material across to a big group of people, and how to actually help as many people as possible. But I'm working on that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that's something that I just want to mention for the listeners, is that something that you and I talked about, and there's a bunch of opportunities that will come along for you as far as teaching is concerned, and I think the best thing that I would like to offer to the listeners is that have you back for another episode when you have your website and everything else set up, or Facebook or whatever, and when they can get in touch with you when it comes to training. And I can tell this from having trained with Montie, and we've known each other for a long time, is that he very much knows what he's talking about when it comes to training, and particularly, just like you said, with training for the job. Let's put it that way. Just when you are in law enforcement or a first responder, it's very specific. You don't need a bodybuilding workout. That's not what you need. You need something that helps you get better at the job. And I think with your experience from all these decades of law enforcement work and staying in shape while you're doing the job, I think a lot of listeners could benefit from that. But I would suggest that we get back to that once you're set up. I mean, you just retired from the Air Marshal service, so that'll take a little bit of time. But as soon as you get everything sorted out, I would like to invite you back to the show.
I would seriously love to, because that's, my passion is training, whether the training is tactics, principles, or physical, whatever. That's kind of what I love to do, because I like to hear myself talk. First of all, Wim, that's obvious to anybody. But no, seriously, in all seriousness, I mean, I've learned some hard lessons. If you can't learn from other people's, blood, sweat, and tears, I mean, and I did a lot of things wrong before I did them right. And so why you don't have to, reinvent the wheel every time, learn from other people's mistakes. And when you can get the benefit of their errors, it's just it is such a shortcut up the mountain. When you're trying to get up the mountain and you're like, what's the best way up there? Well, my personal opinion is I want the helicopter to pick me up and just drop me at the top of the mountain. Other people are, no, I want to meander up, and hey, I'm not going to argue with you. But if it's about your proficiency at your work, at your job, you need to take the most direct route possible. I've taken a lot of wrong routes. Why not learn from that? And because I wish I would have learned from other people's routes earlier in my career. It took me a while because I'm stubborn, and I just did it wrong, and I want other people to not do it wrong as well.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I've been the same thing. That's one of the reasons why I teach and write and do my blog, just to show people, from all my mistakes. And
that's why I listen to you, because other than the fact that you're the big blonde Belgian bastard that is my very, very, very good friend. I mean, seriously, I've learned a lot from you because I have seen where some of the errors of thought that I've had in training and physicality, where I put too much focus on one thing because I was young, and I was just, all I was really interested in was a certain outcome. And as I get older, I'm like, you know what, this maybe longevity is as important as, just being able to lift a certain amount and being able to do a certain thing. do you want to do the certain thing for a short amount of time or for a long amount of time? And that changes your changes your paradigm. And you taught me the long amount of time process as well, which I appreciate you for. Seriously, no bullshit. I really appreciate you for helping me with the longevity part of the game.
See, there's meaning to my life. I haven't completely messed it up.
What else could you ever hope for?
All right, dude. Okay, we're way over time, so I'm going to wrap this up. This episode. I want to thank you, Montie, first of all, for taking the time. I very much appreciate it, and I hope listeners. I mean, this is probably the longest episode that I've done so far.
I apologize.
I cover a bunch of
I ramble.
No.
I ramble, and I'm drunk. So, and I blame you. I blame you, Wim, completely.
Obviously, it's Sunday, so it's my fault. So, but I hope everybody got something out of it. And when you have everything sorted out, you just retired. So when you have everything sorted out for training, I will have you back on the show, and then people get in touch with you. I want to thank everybody for listening, especially my patrons on my Patreon page for supporting me. Obviously, as always, like, share, subscribe, and you can join me on social media. All the links will be in the show notes. And I hope you enjoyed the show, this episode of the show, and I will talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Wim Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.